In the cold corridors of the Galactic Defense Academy, where alien cadets tower over humans with their natural advantages, enhanced strength, telepathic abilities, and centuries of advanced evolution, there walks a girl who speaks in whispers and keeps her eyes downcast. Her classmates see weakness. Her instructors see wasted potential. The galaxy's most elite military academy sees a mistake in their selection process. But they've never seen a human pushed to their absolute limit. They've never witnessed what happens when someone who has nothing left to lose finally decides to fight back. They're about to learn that the most dangerous weapon in the universe isn't superior genetics or advanced technology, it's the quiet determination of someone everyone underestimated. Welcome to the story of how one weak human girl became the nightmare that kept alien war councils awake, and why the galaxy would never make the mistake of underestimating humanity again. The morning alarm pierced through the metallic halls of the Galactic Defense Academy like a blade through silence. Cadet Maya Chen pulled her thin blanket over her head, knowing it would buy her only seconds before the automated systems would flood her cramped quarters with harsh artificial light. Around her, the sounds of movement echoed through the walls as other cadets began their day with the confidence that came naturally to beings bred for war. Maya was not bred for war. She was barely bred for survival. At 17, she stood just over 5 feet tall, with dark hair that she kept pulled back in a simple ponytail and brown eyes that seemed to absorb everything while revealing nothing. In a galaxy where the average sentient being measured 7 feet in height and possessed enough natural strength to crush steel, Maya looked like a child who had wandered into the wrong building. The fact that she had somehow qualified for the most prestigious military academy in known space was a mystery that even she couldn't fully explain. The Academy accepted only the best of the best from across 300 inhabited worlds. Each species sent their elite, the Craxians with their natural armor plating and ability to survive in any atmosphere, the Vortak whose telepathic abilities could coordinate entire fleets without a single spoken word, the Zilani whose reflexes were so fast they could dodge plasma fire, and dozens of other species whose very evolution had shaped them into perfect warriors. And then, there was humanity, represented by Maya Chen, who had never won a fight in her life. She swung her legs over the side of her narrow cot and placed her feet on the cold metal floor. Her quarters were the smallest on the entire station, originally designed as a supply closet before being hastily converted when the Academy received their first human applicant. The space was barely large enough for a bed, a small desk, and a wall-mounted storage unit that held her few possessions. Through the single porthole, she could see the vast expanse of space where training vessels moved like distant stars against the cosmic backdrop. Maya dressed quickly in her standard-issue gray uniform, the fabric hanging loose on her small frame despite the quartermaster's attempts at alteration. The insignia on her sleeve marked her as a first-year cadet, though she had been at the academy for nearly 6 months longer than any of her classmates. The extended orientation period had been deemed necessary for her to adjust to the academic environment, though Maya suspected it was really to give the instructors time to figure out what to do with her. As she made her way to the dining hall, the corridors came alive with the morning routine. Craxian cadets thundered past her, their heavy footsteps making the floor vibrate, while groups of Vortak glided silently by, their large eyes glowing softly as they shared thoughts among themselves. Zilani cadets moved in quick, darting motions, their conversations happening faster than Maya could follow. She pressed herself against the wall to let a group of Titan-class cadets pass, each one standing nearly 9 feet tall and weighing close to half a ton. Nobody acknowledged her presence. In 6 months, she had become as invisible as the air recycling systems that hummed constantly in the background of academy life. The dining hall was a massive chamber with a domed ceiling that displayed a rotating view of nearby star systems. Long tables stretched across the floor, each one designated for different species based on their dietary and social requirements. Maya made her way to the human section, a small table near the back corner that could accommodate up to 12 individuals but had never seated more than one. She collected her meal from the automated dispensary, a protein block, vitamin supplements, and water. The food was nutritionally complete but flavorless, designed to meet the basic requirements for human physiology without wasting resources on palatability. As she ate, Maya watched her classmates interact with the easy confidence of beings who had never questioned their place in the universe. At the Craxian tables, cadets arm wrestled while consuming massive quantities of iron-rich supplements. Their laughter boomed across the chamber like artillery fire. The Vortak sat in perfect silence, their meals untouched as they shared nutrients through some form of telepathic communion. Zelani cadets had already finished eating and were engaging in rapid-fire discussions about tactical theories, their words coming too fast for the translation systems to keep up. Maya finished her protein block and checked the time on her wrist display. She had 15 minutes before her first class, which meant she needed to leave immediately to arrive on time. While her classmates could cross the academy complex in minutes using their natural speed and strength, Maya had to plan every movement carefully to avoid being late. As she stood to leave, her tray clattered to the floor. The sound echoed through the dining hall like a gunshot, and every conversation stopped as hundreds of alien eyes turned to look at her. Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks as she knelt to clean up the scattered remains of her meal. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds before the conversations gradually resumed. "Careful, human," rumbled a voice above her. Maya looked up to see Thorak, a Craxian cadet whose natural armor plating was already scored with the ritual scars of a proven warrior. His species aged differently than humans, and, though he was technically her peer, he possessed centuries of genetic memory and combat instincts that made him more dangerous than most trained soldiers. "Your clumsiness dishonors this place." Maya nodded silently and finished cleaning up her tray. She had learned early that any response would only draw more attention, and attention at the academy was never positive for someone like her. As she straightened up, Thorak placed one of his massive hands on her shoulder, his claws extending just enough to be felt through her uniform. "Perhaps you should consider withdrawing," he said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from being born into a warrior caste. "This academy is not for weaklings." Around them, other cadets had begun to take notice. Maya could feel their eyes on her, some curious, others amused, a few showing what might have been pity. She knew that her response to this moment would set the tone for the rest of her time at the academy, but she also knew that she had no good options. Fighting back was impossible. Thorak could crush her without effort. Running away would only confirm what everyone already believed about her. So Maya did what she had always done when faced with impossible situations. She looked directly into Thorak's eyes and spoke in a voice so quiet that the chamber's audio systems had to strain to pick up her words. "I'll consider it," she said. Thorak's expression shifted slightly, as if he had expected anger or defiance rather than calm acceptance. He removed his hand from her shoulder and stepped back, his warrior's instincts apparently unsure how to process such a response. The watching cadets seemed equally confused by her lack of reaction. Maya collected her tray and walked calmly toward the disposal units, her steps measured and deliberate. Behind her, conversations gradually resumed, but she could feel the weight of curious glances following her across the room. She had just publicly backed down from a challenge, confirming every assumption about human weakness, and yet something in her manner had left even Thorak uncertain. The truth was that Maya had been considering withdrawal for months. Every day brought new evidence that she didn't belong among these genetically superior beings. Her academic scores were average at best, despite studying twice as long as her classmates. Her physical performance in training exercises ranked consistently at the bottom of every metric. She had no natural weapons, no enhanced abilities, no genetic advantages that would make her useful in actual combat. But Maya had something else, something that her instructors hadn't yet recognized and her classmates couldn't understand. She had survived 17 years on a human colony world where survival was never guaranteed, where every day required careful planning and precise execution just to see another sunrise. She had learned to endure pain, to think clearly under pressure, and to find solutions when no obvious options existed. Most importantly, she had learned to watch and listen while others talked, to study and analyze while others acted on instinct. In a universe full of beings who relied on natural advantages, Maya had developed the one skill that no amount of genetic engineering could replicate: the ability to adapt. As she left the dining hall and made her way toward her first class, Maya carried with her the knowledge that she was about to face another day of challenges designed for beings far stronger and faster than herself. Her instructors would shake their heads at her performance, her classmates would continue to ignore or mock her presence, and she would return to her tiny quarters that evening with fresh evidence of her inadequacy. But she would also carry with her the memory of the slight confusion in Thorak's eyes when she hadn't reacted the way he expected. It was a small thing, barely worth noting, but Maya had learned to pay attention to small things. They were often the only advantages available to someone like her. The corridor ahead split into multiple pathways leading to different academic sectors. Maya took the route toward the tactical analysis chambers, where she would spend the next 4 hours studying simulated combat scenarios alongside beings who could process information 10 times faster than she could. It was going to be another long day of falling behind, another exercise in the gap between human limitations and galactic standards. Yet as she walked through the cold metal corridors of the academy, surrounded by the sounds of superior beings preparing for their destinies as warriors and leaders, Maya Chen felt something stirring deep inside her chest. It wasn't hope, exactly, and it certainly wasn't confidence. It was something quieter and more dangerous than either of those things. It was the beginning of a plan. Maya had spent 6 months learning that she couldn't compete with her classmates on their terms. She was slower, weaker, and less sophisticated than any other being in the academy. But she was also something that none of them were, something that their superior genetics and advanced evolution had never required them to become. She was desperate enough to try anything, smart enough to learn from every failure, and stubborn enough to keep going when every logical analysis suggested she should quit. The academy had accepted her as an experiment, a curiosity to be observed and eventually discarded. Her classmates saw her as a mistake, a biological anomaly that would soon correct itself through natural selection. Her instructors viewed her as a problem to be managed until she inevitably withdrew. None of them understood that Maya Chen hadn't come to the academy to prove that humans belonged among the galaxy's elite warriors. She had come because she had nowhere else to go, nothing else to lose, and no other options available to someone from a forgotten colony world on the edge of civilized space. That made her the most dangerous person in the entire academy, though it would take time before anyone realized it. For now, she was just the quiet girl they underestimated, walking alone through corridors filled with beings who had never learned to fear anything. But that was about to change. The tactical analysis chamber hummed with the quiet efficiency of advanced technology as Maya slipped through the entrance, her footsteps silent against the polished floor. The room was designed like an amphitheater, with tiered seating arranged around a central holographic display area where complex battle scenarios would unfold in three-dimensional detail. She had learned to arrive early, not because she needed extra time to prepare, but because finding a seat became increasingly difficult as her larger classmates filled the space. Maya settled into a spot near the back, her small stature allowing her to fit comfortably in seats designed for beings twice her size. Around her, other cadets filtered in with the casual confidence of those who belonged. Cryxians stomped up the aisles, their armored bodies creating small tremors with each step. Vorthak floated rather than walked, their telepathic abilities allowing them to navigate without collision despite their closed eyes. Zolani cadets darted between seats with lightning-quick movements, some arriving at their destinations before Maya could even track their motion. At precisely 0800 hours, the lights dimmed and the central hologram activated. Instructor Vexhai materialized beside the display, her crystalline skin refracting the projection's light into prismatic patterns across the chamber walls. As a member of the Architects, one of the oldest spacefaring civilizations in the galaxy, she possessed knowledge of warfare strategies that spanned millennia. Her species had been designing battle tactics when Maya's ancestors were still discovering fire. Today we examine the Battle of Kepler's Gate, Vexhai announced, her voice carrying perfectly to every corner of the chamber despite speaking barely above a whisper. A conflict that demonstrated the importance of superior positioning and overwhelming force. The hologram shifted, displaying a star system with multiple planets and asteroid fields. Red and blue markers indicated opposing fleets, with the blue forces significantly outnumbered. Maya watched as the scenario began to unfold, the Red Fleet moving in coordinated formations that spoke of centuries of military doctrine and strategic planning. The hegemony forces possessed a 3-to-1 numerical advantage, Vexhai continued, along with superior technology and tactical positioning. The defending fleet consisted primarily of outdated vessels crewed by species with limited combat experience. Maya leaned forward slightly, her attention caught by something in the display. The Blue Fleet's movements seemed random at first glance, but, as she watched more carefully, she began to notice patterns. The seemingly chaotic retreat wasn't actually chaotic at all, it was drawing the Red forces into increasingly unfavorable positions. Around her, other cadets were taking notes on their electronic tablets, dutifully recording Vexhai's analysis of conventional tactics and proper fleet positioning. Maya pulled out her own tablet, but, instead of transcribing the lecture, she began mapping the actual movement patterns she was observing in the hologram. The outcome was never in doubt, Vexhai explained as the Red Fleet closed in on what appeared to be a cornered Blue force. Superior numbers and technology will always prevail against desperate improvisation. But Maya's calculations were telling a different story. She had noticed that the Blue Fleet's retreat had positioned them near a dense asteroid field, and their apparent panic had caused the Red forces to break formation in pursuit of what they believed to be easy targets. The defending fleet hadn't been running away, they had been setting a trap. The hologram reached its climax as the Red Fleet moved in for the final assault. Maya held her breath, waiting to see if her analysis was correct. Then, just as the hegemony forces committed to their attack, the asteroid field exploded into motion. Hidden weapons platforms emerged from behind the larger rocks, and the seemingly defeated Blue Fleet suddenly reformed into a coordinated assault formation. In the span of minutes, the superior Red Fleet found itself caught between the reformed defenders and the asteroid weapons, unable to maneuver effectively due to their broken formation. The 3-to-1 advantage evaporated as the hegemony forces were systematically destroyed by an enemy they had underestimated. Maya looked around the chamber, expecting to see recognition of the tactical brilliance that had just been displayed. Instead, she found her classmates looking confused and disappointed. Several Craxian cadets were shaking their heads in disgust, while the Vortax seemed to be sharing telepathic observations that suggested disbelief rather than admiration. This battle represents an unfortunate anomaly in military history, Vexhai concluded, her tone suggesting distaste. The defending commander chose to rely on deception and misdirection rather than honorable combat. While the tactic proved temporarily successful, it was ultimately a coward strategy that violated the established principles of civilized warfare. Maya's tablet almost slipped from her fingers. The instructor was dismissing the entire engagement as an example of improper military conduct rather than recognizing it as a masterpiece of strategic thinking. The defending commander had taken an impossible situation and found a way to turn weakness into strength, transforming certain defeat into total victory. The lesson here, Vexhai continued, is that while trickery may occasionally succeed, true military excellence comes from superior force properly applied. The defender's victory was an aberration that would never succeed against a properly disciplined enemy. A hand shot up among the Craxian section. Thorak, the same cadet who had confronted Maya in the dining hall, stood to address the instructor. Teacher Vexhai, who was the commander responsible for this dishonorable display? Vexhai's crystalline features shifted in what might have been embarrassment. The defending fleet was under the command of Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Colonial Defense Force. The chamber fell silent. Maya felt every eye in the room turn toward her, the only human present. The connection was obvious. Chen was a common human surname, and the tactical style that had just been dismissed as cowardly was apparently characteristic of her species' approach to warfare. Human tactics, rumbled another Craxian cadet, the words carrying the weight of an insult. No honor, no courage. They rely on tricks because they lack the strength for real combat. Maya kept her eyes fixed on her tablet, her fingers moving rapidly across its surface as she continued her analysis of the battle. The more she studied the engagement, the more brilliant it became. Admiral Chen hadn't just won an impossible victory, she had done it while preserving the maximum number of lives on both sides. The trap had been designed to disable rather than destroy, targeting engine systems and weapon arrays rather than command centers and life support. It was the kind of tactical thinking that could only come from someone who understood what it meant to be the underdog, who had spent a lifetime finding ways to survive against superior opponents. It was strategy born from necessity rather than honor, effectiveness rather than tradition. Cadet Chen, Vexhai called out, her voice cutting through the murmurs that had begun to spread across the chamber. Perhaps you could share your thoughts on your species' unconventional approach to warfare? Maya looked up from her tablet to find hundreds of alien eyes focused on her. The silence stretched uncomfortably as she considered her response. She could apologize for her species' supposedly cowardly tactics, accepting the Academy's judgment that human military thinking was inferior to established galactic standards. She could remain silent and let the moment pass without drawing further attention to herself. Instead, she did something that surprised everyone in the chamber, including herself. She stood up. The Battle of Kepler's Gate wasn't won through cowardice, Maya said, her quiet voice somehow carrying clearly through the acoustically perfect chamber. It was won through superior tactical analysis and precise execution under extreme pressure. The murmurs stopped immediately. Vexai's crystalline skin shifted to a deeper shade of blue, indicating what Maya's studies of architect physiology suggested was surprise. Around the chamber, cadets who had never heard her speak above a whisper were now leaning forward to catch her words. Admiral Chen faced an impossible situation, Maya continued, her confidence growing as she spoke about something she actually understood. 3-to-1 odds, inferior technology, and an enemy that held every conventional advantage. Any attempt at traditional fleet engagement would have resulted in total annihilation with no meaningful damage to the opposing force. She activated her tablet's projection function, sharing her analysis with the chamber's display system. The hologram shifted to show her calculations, trajectory analyses, and timing charts that broke down every element of the battle. But Chen recognized that the hegemony's advantages could become weaknesses under the right circumstances, Maya explained, highlighting specific elements of the engagement. Their superior numbers required them to maintain formation integrity for maximum effectiveness. Their technological advantages made them overconfident, leading to tactical errors when presented with what appeared to be a fleeing enemy. The projection showed how the defending fleet's retreat had been calculated to exploit the psychological profile of hegemony commanders, who had never faced an enemy capable of matching their tactical sophistication. The asteroid field positioning hadn't been random, it had been chosen specifically to create blind spots in hegemony sensor arrays while providing maximum concealment for weapon platforms. The key to the strategy wasn't deception, Maya said, her voice gaining strength as she warmed to her subject. It was adaptation. Chen couldn't win using conventional tactics, so she created new ones. She turned the enemy's strengths against them while maximizing her own limited resources. She manipulated the display to show the battle's aftermath, highlighting casualty figures that had been omitted from the standard Academy presentation. The hegemony fleet had suffered minimal losses despite their defeat, while the defending force had preserved nearly their entire complement. Most importantly, Maya concluded, Chen achieved total victory while minimizing casualties on both sides. The hegemony forces were disabled rather than destroyed, preserving thousands of lives that traditional tactics would have sacrificed. The chamber remained silent as Maya's analysis hung in the air. She had just challenged the fundamental assumptions underlying galactic military doctrine, suggesting that human tactical thinking wasn't inferior but, rather represented an entirely different approach to warfare. Instead of accepting the Academy's judgment that her species lacked honor, she had argued that they possessed something potentially more valuable, the ability to find solutions where others saw only impossible problems. Vexai studied the projected analysis for long moments, her crystalline skin cycling through several color shifts that Maya couldn't interpret. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of uncertainty that had been absent during her original lecture. "Your analysis is thorough, Cadet Chen," the instructor said carefully. "However, military doctrine exists for good reasons. Tactics that rely on misdirection and unconventional approaches may achieve temporary success, but they cannot be depended upon against properly prepared opponents." Maya felt her moment of confidence beginning to slip away. She had spoken up, shared her analysis, and demonstrated that human military thinking had value beyond what the Academy recognized. But she was still just one small voice in a chamber full of beings who had been bred for warfare across countless generations. Then, Instructor Vexai did something unexpected. "We will continue this analysis in our next session," she announced, her skin shifting to a color Maya had never seen before. "I want each of you to study the Battle of Kepler's Gate more thoroughly and prepare arguments for why conventional or unconventional tactics would be preferable in similar circumstances." As the chamber began to empty, Maya remained in her seat, uncertain whether she had just scored a small victory or painted a target on herself for future harassment. Around her, cadets filed out in their usual groups, but she noticed that several of them glanced in her direction as they passed. Some looked curious, others seemed annoyed, and a few appeared thoughtful. Thorak stopped at the end of her row, his massive form blocking the aisle as other cadets moved around him. For a moment, Maya thought he might continue their morning confrontation, perhaps escalating to actual physical intimidation. Instead, he studied her with the kind of careful attention that warriors reserved for potential threats. "Interesting," he said finally, before moving on without further comment. Maya gathered her belongings and made her way toward the exit, her mind racing with the implications of what had just happened. For 6 months, she had been invisible, ignored, and dismissed as irrelevant to the Academy's mission. In the span of a single class period, she had managed to challenge established doctrine, impress an instructor, and apparently earn the attention of cadets who had never bothered to notice her existence. She wasn't sure if that was progress or disaster, but it was definitely change. As she stepped into the corridor outside the tactical analysis chamber, Maya realized that her carefully maintained invisibility was over. Whatever happened next, she could no longer hide among the background noise of Academy life. She had spoken up, stood out, and demonstrated that human thinking might have value in a galaxy that had already judged her species as inferior. The question now was whether she could survive the attention that her moment of courage had earned her. Walking alone through corridors filled with beings who possessed every natural advantage except the one she had just discovered she might possess, Maya Chen began to understand that her time at the Academy was about to become much more complicated and infinitely more dangerous. Maya's new visibility brought consequences faster than she had anticipated. 3 days after her presentation in tactical analysis, she found herself facing the Academy's first practical combat examination. The notice had appeared on her personal terminal without warning, scheduling her for individual assessment in the primary training complex at 0600 hours. Standing outside the massive doors of Combat Arena 7, Maya felt the familiar weight of inadequacy settle on her shoulders. Through the transparent aluminum viewing panels, she could see the arena's interior, a vast space filled with obstacles, terrain variations, and combat scenarios designed to test every aspect of a cadet's military capabilities. The arena could simulate any environment from jungle worlds to asteroid mining stations, complete with environmental hazards and hostile autonomous units. Cadet Chen, report for assessment, came the automated announcement, and the doors cycled open with a pneumatic hiss. Maya stepped inside to find Instructor Krell waiting for her, his 8-foot frame making the spacious arena seem cramped. As a member of the Saurian warrior caste, Krell had been bred for combat across countless generations. His scaled skin was naturally armored, his claws could tear through metal plating, and his reflexes were fast enough to deflect plasma bolts with his bare hands. He had never lost a combat engagement in over 2 centuries of military service. Cadet Chen, Krell growled, his voice carrying the rumbling undertones that marked his species as apex predators. Your recent academic performance has drawn attention. Command wants to assess whether your theoretical knowledge translates to practical capability. Maya nodded silently, though inside her mind was racing. The Academy's combat assessments were designed for beings with natural weapons, enhanced strength, and combat instincts refined over millions of years of evolution. She possessed none of these advantages, and her previous training exercises had consistently ranked her at the bottom of every performance metric. You will face 3 scenarios, Krell explained, gesturing toward the arena's control booth where other instructors were gathering to observe. Urban warfare, ship-to-ship boarding action, and open terrain combat. Each scenario will adapt to your performance level, increasing in difficulty until you reach your failure point. The viewing gallery above was filling with cadets from her class. Maya could see Thorak among them, along with dozens of other beings who had never shown any interest in her existence before her tactical analysis presentation. Word had apparently spread about the human who had challenged established doctrine, and now everyone wanted to see how theoretical knowledge would fare against practical reality. Your equipment, Krell said, indicating a weapons rack beside the arena entrance. Maya approached the display of armaments with growing unease. Energy weapons designed for beings with enhanced strength were too heavy for her to wield effectively. Melee weapons built for creatures with natural armor would be useless in her hands. Even the protective gear was sized for cadets twice her mass. She selected the lightest plasma rifle available, though it still felt unwieldy in her grip. A standard combat vest that hung loosely on her frame, and a helmet that was slightly too large despite being the smallest available size. Looking at herself in the polished surface of the weapons rack, Maya resembled a child playing dress-up in adult military gear. Scenario 1 commencing, announced the arena's control system. The space around Maya shifted, walls rising from the floor and atmospheric processors filling the air with the haze and noise of an urban combat zone. Buildings materialized around her, complete with civilians, hostile forces, and objective markers that appeared on her helmet's display system. Maya crouched behind a concrete barrier as simulated enemy fire began to pepper her position. The scenario was straightforward: advance through hostile territory, eliminate enemy forces, and secure a strategic building at the far end of the combat zone. For a being with enhanced speed and natural weapons, it would be a challenging but manageable exercise. For Maya, it was impossible using conventional tactics. She watched through her helmet's tactical display as enemy positions were highlighted in red. 12 hostile units positioned throughout the urban landscape, each one equipped with weapons that could eliminate her with a single direct hit. Her plasma rifle had enough charge for perhaps 20 shots, and her previous training had demonstrated that her accuracy under pressure was questionable at best. A Craxian cadet could charge directly through the enemy positions, trusting their natural armor to absorb incoming fire while their superior strength allowed them to eliminate targets at close range. A Vorthack would use telepathic abilities to coordinate with friendly units and predict enemy movements. A Zalani could move so quickly that enemy targeting systems couldn't track them effectively. Maya had none of these options. What she did have was 6 months of detailed study of every combat scenario the Academy had ever used, combined with the tactical thinking that had allowed Admiral Chen to defeat impossible odds. Instead of advancing toward the objective, Maya began to move laterally, using the urban environment's complex layout to avoid direct confrontation with enemy forces. She identified patterns in their patrol routes, gaps in their coverage, and opportunities to achieve her objective without engaging in direct combat. The first enemy unit she encountered was eliminated not through superior firepower but through environmental manipulation. Maya waited until the hostile was positioned beneath a construction crane, then used her plasma rifle to sever the support cables. The falling debris eliminated the target without revealing her position or expending significant ammunition. In the viewing gallery above, she could hear murmurs of confusion. Her classmates had expected to watch her fail quickly and spectacularly, confirming their assumptions about human weakness. Instead, they were witnessing something they had never seen before: warfare conducted through intelligence rather than strength. Maya continued through the scenario, using everything from improvised explosive devices made from construction materials to redirecting the arena's automated systems to create distractions. When she finally reached the objective building, she had eliminated only 3 enemy units through direct combat, allowing environmental factors and tactical positioning to handle the rest. The urban scenario ended with Maya successfully securing the objective in less time than the Academy average, despite her obvious physical limitations. In the viewing gallery, silence had replaced the earlier murmurs of anticipated failure. Scenario 2 commencing, the arena announced, and the urban landscape dissolved around Maya, replaced by the cramped corridors and bulkheads of a spacecraft interior. The ship-to-ship boarding scenario was traditionally the most difficult test for Academy cadets, requiring them to clear multiple decks of hostile forces while navigating in confined spaces that negated many natural advantages. Maya found herself in the cargo bay of a simulated enemy vessel, with orders to advance to the bridge and eliminate or capture the commanding officer. Enemy forces were positioned throughout the ship's corridors, and the scenario included various hazards from hull breaches to artificial gravity fluctuations. This time, Maya's approach was even more unconventional. Rather than advancing through the main corridors where enemy forces waited in prepared positions, she began to systematically disable the ship's internal systems. Using access panels and maintenance shafts that were too small for larger beings, she moved through areas of the vessel that the enemy hadn't bothered to guard. She cut power to life support in sections of the ship, forcing enemy units to abandon their positions to investigate the failures. She triggered fire suppression systems that filled corridors with obscuring foam, then used the chaos to advance through areas that had been heavily defended moments earlier. When she finally reached the bridge, the commanding officer was alone, his forces scattered throughout the ship dealing with what appeared to be multiple critical system failures. The scenario ended with Maya achieving total success while engaging in minimal direct combat. She had turned the enemy's own ship into her ally, using their dependence on technology against them while exploiting her small size and technical knowledge to achieve objectives that brute force couldn't accomplish. In the viewing gallery, the silence was now complete. Maya's classmates had never seen anything like the tactics she was employing. Even Instructor Krell was studying the tactical displays with an expression that might have been confusion or respect. Scenario 3 commencing, came the announcement, and Maya found herself standing in an open field with rolling hills and scattered vegetation stretching to the horizon. This was the traditional combat scenario, the type of engagement where superior strength, speed, and natural weapons would determine the outcome. There were no environmental factors to exploit, no complex systems to manipulate, and no terrain features that could substitute for personal combat capability. 20 enemy units were positioned across the landscape, each one equipped with weapons and tactical programming that would challenge even experienced academy graduates. Maya was expected to advance across open ground, engage hostile forces in direct combat, and secure a strategic position on the far hilltop. For the first time since entering the arena, Maya felt genuine fear. This scenario stripped away every advantage she had discovered, leaving only her limited physical capabilities against opponents designed to test beings far stronger than herself. There was nowhere to hide, nothing to manipulate, and no clever solutions that could substitute for raw combat power. She checked her weapons and equipment, knowing that her plasma rifle contained enough charge for perhaps 15 shots and that her lightweight armor would provide minimal protection against enemy weapons. Around her, the open terrain offered little concealment beyond shallow depressions and scattered rocks that couldn't hide someone crouched, much less provide cover during an advance. Maya began to move forward, keeping low and trying to minimize her profile against the skyline. The first enemy unit opened fire when she was still hundreds of meters from any significant cover, forcing her to dive into a shallow ditch that provided only marginal protection. Return fire from her plasma rifle missed its target completely, the weapon's recoil throwing off her aim despite hours of practice. In the viewing gallery, her classmates were finally seeing what they had expected, clear evidence of human inadequacy in real combat conditions. Without environmental factors to exploit or technical systems to manipulate, Maya was just another weak organic being facing opponents designed to be superior in every way. But, as she lay in the ditch with enemy fire passing overhead, Maya realized something that changed her entire approach to the scenario. The Academy's combat assessments weren't just tests of individual capability, they were also evaluations of tactical thinking under pressure. The instructors weren't just measuring whether she could win, they were analyzing how she responded to impossible situations. Maya stopped trying to advance toward the objective and instead began to study the enemy positions, looking for patterns in their movement and gaps in their coordination. She noticed that the hostile units were programmed to respond to direct threats but didn't adapt well to unexpected behaviors. They expected her to advance toward the objective, and their positioning was optimized to counter conventional approaches. So Maya decided to do something that no Academy cadet had ever attempted in this scenario. She began to retreat. Moving away from the objective, she drew enemy units out of their prepared positions, forcing them to pursue her across terrain that she could choose. She led them into areas where their superior numbers became a disadvantage, where they interfered with each other's targeting, and where her smaller size allowed her to find cover that larger beings couldn't use effectively. What followed was the longest single combat scenario in Academy history, a running battle that lasted over 2 hours as Maya systematically eliminated enemy units through patience, positioning, and precise timing rather than superior firepower. She turned the open terrain into a complex tactical puzzle, using every depression, rock formation, and elevation change to create advantages where none had existed before. When the final enemy unit fell, Maya was still hundreds of meters from the original objective. She had achieved total victory through methods that no Academy instructor had ever seen, proving that success could be measured by more than just reaching predetermined goals. The scenario ended, and the arena returned to its default configuration. Maya stood in the center of the space, her equipment battered and her uniform torn, but victorious in ways that none of her observers had anticipated. In the viewing gallery above, her classmates and instructors were engaged in animated discussions that she couldn't hear but could easily imagine. Instructor Krell approached her with an expression that Maya couldn't read. His scaled features were designed for intimidation rather than subtle emotion, but something in his posture suggested that the assessment had produced results he hadn't expected. "Cadet Chen," he said, his voice carrying undertones that might have been respect. "Your performance today has been unique. I will need time to evaluate these results before providing official scores." Maya nodded and began to remove her combat gear, her hands shaking slightly from exhaustion and adrenaline. She had survived the Academy's combat assessment, proving that human tactics could succeed even against scenarios designed for beings with natural advantages. But she had also demonstrated capabilities that would make her impossible to ignore going forward. As she left the arena, Maya realized that her quiet existence at the academy was permanently over. She had proven that humans could contribute something valuable to galactic military doctrine, but that victory came with a price. From now on, she would be watched, analyzed, and challenged by beings who no longer saw her as irrelevant. The question was whether she was strong enough to handle the attention that her success had earned her, and whether the academy was ready for what she represented, proof that being underestimated could be the most dangerous advantage of all. The summons came at 0300 hours, delivered by a security drone that materialized outside Maya's quarters with the silent efficiency that marked all academy operations. The message was brief and official: report to Conference Chamber Alpha immediately for emergency consultation. No explanation, no context, and no indication of what kind of emergency would require the presence of the Academy's least distinguished cadet in the middle of the night cycle. Maya dressed quickly in her standard uniform, though she noticed her hands were trembling slightly as she sealed the fastenings. In the 3 weeks since her combat assessment, life at the Academy had become increasingly complicated. Her tactical innovations had been studied, analyzed, and debated by instructors who weren't sure whether to classify her methods as brilliant or dangerous. Some cadets now watched her with curiosity rather than dismissal, while others seemed to view her success as a personal affront to the established order. The corridors were dimly lit during night hours, with only emergency lighting to guide her path toward the Academy's administrative sector. Maya's footsteps echoed in the empty passages, creating an eerie rhythm that seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. As she walked, she tried to imagine what kind of emergency could require her input. Her tactical knowledge was still limited compared to senior cadets, and her practical experience remained minimal despite her recent successes. Conference Chamber Alpha was located in the Academy's most secure section, reserved for meetings involving classified information or sensitive strategic planning. Maya had never been inside the chamber before, though she had studied its specifications as part of her architectural analysis of the Academy complex. The space was designed to accommodate delegates from multiple species while providing absolute privacy through advanced signal shielding and countermeasure systems. When the chamber doors cycled open, Maya found herself facing a gathering that made her stomach drop. Seated around the central conference table were not only Academy instructors but also high-ranking military officers from across the galaxy. She recognized Admiral Vexnai of the Craxian Defense Corps, General Thorvin of the Vorthak Strategic Command, and at least 6 other beings whose rank insignia indicated authority far beyond anything she had ever encountered. At the head of the table sat Commandant Zirith, the Academy's director and one of the most decorated military leaders in galactic history. As a member of the ancient celestial species, Zirith possessed knowledge and experience that spanned centuries of warfare across multiple star systems. His presence at any gathering indicated matters of the highest importance. "Cadet Chen," Commandant Zirith said, his voice carrying the harmonics that marked his species' communication patterns. "Thank you for responding so quickly. Please, take a seat." Maya moved to the indicated chair, feeling acutely aware of how small and out of place she appeared among these legendary military figures. Around the table, beings who commanded fleets and determined the fate of entire star systems were studying her with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. "Cadet Chen," Admiral Vexnai rumbled, her Craxian accent making the words sound like distant thunder, 3 hours ago, we received a priority transmission from the outer monitoring stations. A hostile fleet of unknown origin has been detected approaching the Meridian system. Maya nodded, though she wasn't sure why this information was being shared with her. The Meridian system was strategically important, containing several major military installations and serving as a key transit point for galactic trade routes, but military intelligence was far beyond her clearance level. General Thorvin leaned forward, his large Vorthak eyes focusing intently on Maya's face. "The approaching fleet consists of approximately 200 vessels using technology we do not recognize. Their formation patterns and movement profiles suggest tactical sophistication beyond anything we have previously encountered. Initial analysis indicates they will reach Meridian space in approximately 14 hours, Commandant Zirith added. Standard defensive protocols call for the mobilization of the Third Fleet to intercept them before they can threaten our installations." Maya waited for someone to explain why she was receiving this briefing, but the silence stretched uncomfortably as the assembled officers continued to study her. Finally, she found the courage to speak. Respectfully, sir, I don't understand why you're telling me this information, she said quietly. Admiral Vexnai's expression shifted to what might have been amusement. Because, Cadet Chen, the approaching fleet's tactical patterns match the unconventional strategies that you demonstrated in your recent assessments. Whoever is commanding those ships thinks like you do. The implications hit Maya like a physical blow. If the hostile fleet was using human-style tactics, it meant that somewhere in the galaxy, other humans were alive, organized, and apparently hostile toward the established galactic order. Everything she had been told about humanity's isolation, about being the last remnant of a failed colonial expansion, was suddenly called into question. We need to understand how to counter tactics that rely on misdirection and adaptive strategy rather than superior force, General Thorvin explained. Your recent performances suggest that you understand this type of warfare better than anyone else in our command structure. Commandant Zirith activated the chamber's holographic display, showing the approaching fleet in real time. Maya studied the formation, her mind automatically beginning to analyze movement patterns and tactical positioning. What she saw made her blood run cold. The hostile fleet wasn't just using human-style tactics, they were using them with a level of sophistication that suggested centuries of development and refinement. Their movements spoke of a military tradition that had evolved in isolation, adapting human strategic thinking to galactic-scale warfare in ways that the Academy had never imagined. They're not trying to fight us, Maya said suddenly, her voice cutting through the tense silence. This isn't an invasion fleet. Around the table, several officers exchanged skeptical glances. Admiral Vexnai's scaled features hardened into an expression of disapproval. Cadet, 200 armed vessels approaching our territory represents a clear hostile threat, she growled. What possible interpretation could suggest otherwise? Maya stood up, moving to the holographic display where she could manipulate the tactical projections. Her hands moved quickly across the control interface, highlighting specific aspects of the fleet's formation and movement patterns. Look at their positioning, she explained, her confidence growing as she worked with data rather than facing direct scrutiny. If they intended to attack Meridian, they would approach from multiple vectors to prevent our forces from concentrating their defense. Instead, they're maintaining a tight formation that actually makes them more vulnerable to conventional tactics. She manipulated the display to show predicted engagement zones and optimal attack patterns. A fleet this size could overwhelm our defenses through sheer numbers if they were willing to accept heavy casualties. But, their formation is designed to minimize losses, not maximize damage to us. Then, what do you believe they want? Commandant Zirith asked, his harmonic voice carrying a note of genuine interest. Maya studied the display for several more moments, analyzing every aspect of the approaching fleet's behavior. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. They want to talk to us. But, they're expecting us to shoot first and ask questions later, so they're coming prepared to defend themselves. The chamber erupted in voices as officers began debating the implications of Maya's analysis. Some argued that assuming peaceful intentions from an unknown fleet was dangerous naivety, while others pointed out that her tactical assessments had proven reliable in the past. Even if your analysis is correct, General Thorvin said once the discussions had subsided, the approaching fleet represents capabilities that could threaten our entire defensive structure. We cannot simply assume their intentions are peaceful and leave ourselves vulnerable. Maya nodded, understanding the impossible position the Academy leadership faced. They couldn't ignore a potential threat, but they also couldn't afford to start a war with beings who might possess tactical advantages that conventional forces couldn't counter. What if we approach them the way they're expecting us to, she suggested. Send a response that demonstrates we understand their tactical sophistication while making it clear that we're willing to communicate. Commandant Zirith leaned back in his chair, his ancient features thoughtful. Explain. Maya moved back to the holographic display, calling up tactical simulations that she began to modify in real time. We position our fleet in a formation that appears defensive but includes subtle elements that only someone familiar with human tactical thinking would recognize. We create a scenario where they can demonstrate peaceful intentions without appearing weak, and we can respond appropriately without compromising our defensive capabilities. The simulation she created showed a complex dance of fleet movements, with both sides maneuvering in ways that would appear threatening to conventional analysis but actually created opportunities for peaceful communication. It was diplomacy conducted through tactical positioning, a language that both fleets would understand.
This is highly irregular, Admiral Vexnai observed, though her tone suggested consideration rather than outright rejection.
You're proposing that we base our response to a potential threat on the tactical theories of an untested cadet. With respect, Admiral, Maya replied, meeting the larger being's gaze directly, I'm proposing that we base our response on tactical theories that have already proven effective against superior opponents. The Battle of Kepler's Gate wasn't an anomaly, it was an example of what human strategic thinking can accomplish. The debate that followed lasted for over an hour, with military leaders arguing the merits of conventional versus unconventional responses to the approaching fleet. Maya found herself defending not just her analysis but the entire concept that human tactical thinking might have value in galactic military affairs.
Finally, Commandant Zirith called for silence.
We will implement a modified version of Cadet Chen's proposal, he announced. Admiral Vexnai will position the Third Fleet according to the tactical parameters she has outlined, while maintaining readiness for immediate defensive action if peaceful contact fails. As the gathering began to disperse, Maya realized that she had just influenced a decision that could determine whether the galaxy faced its first major interstellar war in over a century. The quiet girl who had once been invisible to her classmates was now helping to shape military policy at the highest levels of galactic government. But, as she left Conference Chamber Alpha and made her way back through the darkened corridors toward her quarters, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that the approaching fleet represented something far more significant than a potential threat. If other humans had survived somewhere in the galaxy and developed their own advanced civilization, it meant that everything the Academy believed about human capabilities was based on incomplete information. The tactical innovations that had impressed her instructors might be elementary compared to what the approaching fleet represented. The strategies that had earned her recognition at the Academy could be common knowledge among beings who had spent centuries refining human approaches to warfare. Maya Chen had spent months proving that humans deserved recognition as capable beings rather than failed evolutionary experiments. Now she faced the possibility that she was about to encounter humans who could demonstrate capabilities that would make her own achievements seem insignificant. The galaxy was about to discover what humans could accomplish when they had centuries to develop their potential instead of just a few months at a military academy. Maya wasn't sure whether that revelation would elevate her species' status or confirm their classification as a dangerous threat that needed to be contained. Either way, the quiet girl they had underestimated was about to become the bridge between two civilizations that had never imagined each other's existence. The fate of both might depend on whether she had learned enough about warfare and diplomacy to prevent a conflict that could reshape the galaxy's balance of power. The bridge of the galactic flagship Harmony's Edge hummed with controlled tension as Maya stood beside Commandant Zirith, watching the tactical displays that showed two fleets approaching what could become the galaxy's most significant confrontation in centuries. 12 hours had passed since the emergency conference, and the unknown fleet had maintained their approach vector while responding to the Academy's positioning with subtle adjustments that confirmed Maya's analysis. They were definitely human, and they definitely wanted to communicate. Contact in 47 minutes, reported the ship's tactical officer, a six-armed Nexian whose multiple appendages moved across control interfaces with fluid precision. The unknown fleet has reduced velocity and adopted a formation consistent with diplomatic protocols. Maya studied the approaching ships through the bridge's main viewing screen, her enhanced tactical display highlighting details that would have been invisible to unassisted observation. The vessels were unlike anything in the galactic database, built with design principles that spoke of human engineering taken in directions the Academy had never imagined. They were sleek where galactic ships were massive, elegant where others were imposing, and they moved with a coordination that suggested tactical thinking refined over generations. Cadet Chen, Commandant Zirith said, his harmonic voice carrying across the bridge, you've been monitoring their formation adjustments. What do you observe? Maya moved to the central tactical station, her small hands dancing across controls designed for larger beings but modified for her use during the journey to the contact zone. The data she had been analyzing painted a picture that both excited and terrified her. They're demonstrating capabilities while maintaining peaceful intent, she explained, highlighting specific aspects of the fleet's movements. Each maneuver showcases technological advantages, but they're doing it in ways that don't threaten our formation. They want us to understand that they could overwhelm our defenses if they chose to, but they're choosing not to. Admiral Vexnai leaned forward from her position at the command table, her massive Craxian frame making the reinforced furniture creak.
You're suggesting they're showing off? I'm suggesting they're negotiating, Maya replied. This entire approach has been a demonstration of both capability and restraint. They could have attacked the Meridian system installations before we arrived, but they waited for us. They could have positioned for maximum tactical advantage, but they chose formations that allow for peaceful resolution. The communication board suddenly activated with an incoming transmission. The bridge fell silent as the message began to decode, revealing patterns that the ship's computers struggled to interpret. It's a mathematical sequence, reported the communications officer, her crystalline architect features refracting the display light in complex patterns. But the encoding is unlike anything in our databases. Maya moved to the communications station, studying the data stream with growing recognition. It's human mathematical notation, but evolved. They're transmitting in base 12 rather than base 10, and they're using computational frameworks that are centuries ahead of Earth's original mathematics. She worked quickly to establish translation protocols, her fingers flying across interfaces as she built bridges between mathematical systems that had developed in complete isolation. The process took 20 minutes, during which both fleets maintained their positions in a silent dance of mutual evaluation. When the translation finally resolved, the message was simple and profound: "Children of Earth greet the children of stars. We request permission to speak." The bridge erupted in controlled excitement as the implications became clear. The unknown fleet wasn't just human, they were descendants of Earth colonists who had survived, thrived, and developed into a technological civilization that had been hidden somewhere in the galaxy for centuries. "Compose a response," Commandant Zirith ordered, his harmonic voice carrying undertones of historical significance. "Inform them that we welcome communication and are prepared to establish formal contact protocols." Maya began working on the translation, but paused as she realized the magnitude of what was happening. She was about to become the first person in galactic history to establish communication between the established interstellar community and a previously unknown human civilization. Every word would be analyzed, recorded, and studied for generations. "Commandant," she said quietly, "perhaps someone with more diplomatic experience should handle the initial exchange." Ziritha's ancient features shifted into what might have been amusement. "Cadet Chen, you are the only being in this fleet who understands both human tactical thinking and galactic diplomatic protocols. You have become our translator not just of languages, but of entire ways of thinking." Maya composed the response carefully, using mathematical frameworks that would demonstrate the Academy's acceptance of human technological advancement while establishing frameworks for more complex communication. When she transmitted the message, she included her personal identification codes, marking herself as the primary contact for future exchanges. The response came back almost immediately, and this time it included audio components that made Maya's eyes fill with tears. It was a human voice speaking in accented English that had evolved over centuries of isolation, but was still recognizably the language of her species. "Greetings from the Terran Colonial Federation," the voice said, warm with emotion and rich with harmonics that suggested advanced vocal modification technology. "I am Admiral Sarah Reeves, commanding the Exploration Fleet New Horizons. We have traveled very far to find others who remember Earth." Maya activated the bridge's audio systems, and her voice carried clearly across the communication channels as she responded in the same evolved English that Admiral Reeves had used. "Admiral Reeves, this is Cadet Maya Chen of the Galactic Defense Academy. We are honored by your contact and eager to establish formal relations between our civilizations." The pause that followed stretched for nearly a minute before Admiral Reeves responded, and, when she did, her voice carried amazement and something that might have been recognition. "Chen," she said slowly. "Are you related to Admiral Sarah Chen of the Colonial Defense Force?" Maya felt her world shift as connections she had never imagined began to form in her mind. "Admiral Sarah Chen was my ancestor. She commanded the defense of Kepler's Gate over 2 centuries ago." The silence that followed was broken by what sounded like celebration from the Terran fleet's communication channels. When Admiral Reeves spoke again, her voice carried joy and reverence in equal measure. "Maya Chen, granddaughter of the greatest tactical genius in human history, you cannot imagine how fitting it is that you are the one to welcome us home to the larger galaxy.
Your ancestors' innovations saved not just the battles she fought, but provided the foundation for everything our civilization became. Over the next several hours, as the two fleets maintained their careful diplomatic dance, Maya found herself serving as the primary interpreter not just of language but of history itself. The Terran Colonial Federation had indeed evolved from survivors of early human expansion who had been cut off from Earth and forced to develop in isolation. Admiral Chen's tactical innovations had been preserved, studied, and refined over generations until they became the basis for an entire military philosophy. The humans of the Federation had survived by embracing the same principles that Maya had rediscovered at the Academy: adaptation, intelligence, and the ability to turn disadvantages into strengths. But they had taken these concepts far beyond anything the galaxy had imagined possible. "We have monitored galactic communications for decades," Admiral Reeves explained during one of their exchanges. "We knew that humanity was represented in your academy, and we knew that our tactical thinking was being dismissed as cowardly or ineffective. We came to demonstrate that human strategic philosophy has value, and to offer our knowledge to the broader galactic community." As the formal diplomatic protocols were established and delegations prepared to meet in person, Maya realized that her journey from invisible cadet to galactic diplomat had reached a conclusion she never could have imagined. The quiet girl they had underestimated had become the bridge between two civilizations, but, more importantly, she had proven that human contributions to galactic society extended far beyond what anyone had believed possible. 3 days later, as she stood in the Academy's main assembly hall watching Terran Federation representatives demonstrate tactical innovations that left galactic military leaders speechless, Maya understood that her time as an underestimated outsider was permanently over. The Federation's arrival had validated human strategic thinking in ways that her individual achievements never could have accomplished. But, perhaps more significantly, she had learned that being underestimated could be transformed from a weakness into a strength, that quiet observation could be more powerful than loud assertions, and that the most dangerous opponents were often those who appeared to be the least threatening. The Academy's cadets now studied human tactical theory as required curriculum, with Maya serving as a primary instructor despite her continued status as a student. Galactic military doctrine had been fundamentally altered by the recognition that intelligence and adaptation could be more valuable than raw physical superiority. The girl who had once eaten alone in the dining hall now found herself surrounded by beings who wanted to understand how human thinking could be applied to their own strategic challenges. The cadet who had been dismissed as a failed experiment was now teaching courses to senior officers from across the galaxy. Most importantly, Maya Chen had discovered that her ancestors' legacy lived on not just in historical records but in a thriving civilization that had turned humanity's supposed weaknesses into their greatest strengths. The quiet determination that had carried her through months of failure and dismissal was the same quality that had allowed humans to survive, adapt, and eventually emerge as equals among the galaxy's elite civilizations. Standing in the Academy's observation deck, looking out at the stars where human ships now moved freely among the vessels of dozens of other species, Maya reflected on the journey that had brought her from isolation to integration. She had learned that strength came in many forms, that intelligence could overcome almost any physical disadvantage, and that sometimes the most important victories were won not through force but through the quiet persistence of someone who refused to give up. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, just as the Academy had underestimated her. Both had learned that such assumptions could be dangerous, and both had benefited from recognizing that diversity of thought and approach was more valuable than uniformity of capability. Maya Chen, the quiet girl they had once dismissed, had become living proof that being different wasn't a weakness to be overcome but a strength to be cultivated. In a universe full of beings who relied on natural advantages, she had demonstrated that the most powerful weapon was often the willingness to think in ways that others couldn't imagine. The Academy that had once seen her as a curiosity now recognized her as a vital part of their mission to prepare the galaxy's defenders for challenges that would require more than just superior firepower. The classmates who had ignored her existence now sought her guidance on problems that conventional thinking couldn't solve. And, in the quiet moments between her duties as instructor, diplomat, and bridge between civilizations, Maya sometimes smiled as she remembered the morning when Thorak had suggested she consider withdrawing from the Academy. She had considered it, carefully and thoroughly, and decided that staying was worth whatever challenges lay ahead. That decision had changed not just her life but the entire galaxy's understanding of what it meant to be strong. The quiet girl they had underestimated had taught them all a lesson they would never forget: that the most dangerous beings in the universe were often those who appeared to be the most harmless, and that wisdom lay in never again making the mistake of judging capability by appearance. In the end, Maya-chan had done more than prove that humans belonged among the galaxy's elite. She had proven that diversity of thought and approach was essential for any civilization that wanted to survive and thrive among the stars. The galaxy was stronger because she had been underestimated, and she was stronger because she had learned to turn that underestimation into her greatest advantage.